Samuel Whitmore sat in the quiet solitude of his private office, the late afternoon sun casting a golden hue through the window blinds. On his polished oak desk lay a stack of printed complaints, far more than he was used to seeing. His fingers hovered above the papers, hesitant, almost afraid to read what had become of the hotel chain he had devoted his life to building. This wasn't just a business to him. These hotels were his legacy. Each one had been born from long nights, tight budgets, and relentless perseverance. They were meant to be safe havens for travelers, sanctuaries where everyone, no matter their background, appearance, or means, felt welcomed, respected, and seen. But lately, something had shifted. Something in the soul of his creation felt tainted. The complaints weren't the usual gripes about lukewarm coffee or slow Wi-Fi. No, these carried a different weight. The words were sharp, laced with frustration and, worse, disappointment. Guests described staff members as cold, indifferent, even cruel. Reports told of dismissive behavior, judgmental stares, and an air of arrogance that had seeped into places that once radiated warmth. Samuel's heart sank as he flipped to a particular letter from a location that had once been a shining star in the region. A guest described being laughed at for their clothing, ignored at the front desk, and made to feel small simply because they didn't fit the look of a luxury hotel patron. Another recounted how they had to fight just to be acknowledged by a receptionist who seemed more interested in her phone than in doing her job. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his short graying hair. His chest tightened, not out of anger, but sorrow. He had built this brand to stand for dignity, to be a symbol that success didn't have to come at the cost of decency. And now it was being eroded by the very people meant to uphold it. He had already sent his district manager to investigate, but the report that came back was insultingly vague. Staff performing adequately, no major issues observed. Adequate? That wasn't good enough. Not for Samuel. He stood up slowly, determination settling deep in his bones. This wasn't just about salvaging a brand. This was about rescuing the heart of something he loved. A week later, he was standing across the street from that very hotel. His hair had grown a little longer. He'd let a beard fill in the sharp lines of his jaw, and he wore a weathered jacket that looked like it had seen better days. A baseball cap sat low over his brow, concealing his face just enough. To anyone watching, he was simply another weary traveler, maybe even one a bit down on his luck. The timing was perfect. This hotel was one of 6 in the region, and thanks to the layers of corporate infrastructure, most of the staff had never even seen the CEO in person. To them, he'd be invisible, and that was exactly what he needed. As he pushed through the glass doors, a gust of cool, artificial air greeted him. The lobby, once designed to feel inviting, now felt sterile and distant. His eyes went straight to the front desk. A young woman stood there, her sleek uniform pristine, but her posture lax. She was laughing softly with a bellboy, her attention more on her phone than her surroundings. Her name tag read Jessica. Samuel lingered for a moment, observing. Jessica didn't even glance his way. But then, the door behind him swung open and a family of 4 stepped inside. Their clothes were simple, worn but clean. The father's shoulders were slightly hunched, the mother's eyes scanning the lobby with uncertainty, and the 2 children clung close to their parents. They didn't fit the image of a typical upscale hotel guest, and Jessica made that painfully clear. With one look, she stifled a laugh, turned to the bellboy, and whispered something under her breath. Whatever it was, it caused him to snicker. Samuel's stomach turned. The father approached the desk, his voice soft but steady. "Hi. We have a reservation under the name Carter." Jessica didn't look up right away. When she did, it was with thinly veiled suspicion. "Are you sure?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Yes," the mother replied, her voice more nervous now. I booked it online." Jessica rolled her eyes and began typing, slowly, dramatically. "We require a credit card for incidentals," she said. The father nodded, already pulling out a worn leather wallet. "We have one." She eyed the card as though expecting it to crumble in her hands. "Just making sure," she said, her smile brittle. "You know, for damages?" That word, damages, hit Samuel like a slap. His jaw clenched. This wasn't just poor service. This was humiliation. But he forced himself to remain in character. He stepped forward. "Excuse me, I'd like to check in too." Jessica barely turned her head. "Name?" "Thomas Walker," he said calmly, his prepared alias. She typed half-heartedly, handed him a form to sign, and returned to her phone. No greeting, no warmth, just cold efficiency. As he took the form, he glanced back at the family, who were now awkwardly waiting off to the side. The little girl clutched her mother's hand, shifting nervously. Samuel signed the paper, handed it back, and then turned to them with a gentle smile. "First time staying here?" he asked quietly. The father nodded. "Yeah, we saved up for this." Jessica scoffed under her breath, but when Samuel looked directly at her, her eyes darted away. He took his key card and stepped toward the elevators, each step weighed down with something heavier than anger. What he'd witnessed was no isolated incident. It was a symptom of complacency, of unchecked attitudes, of something broken deep within the culture he had tried so hard to protect. And he wasn't about to let it go. Not now. Not ever. This wasn't just an isolated incident. If Jessica felt comfortable treating guests with such blatant disrespect, it meant the rot ran far deeper than a single employee's attitude. Samuel's mind churned with unease. The problem wasn't just visible at the front desk. It was ingrained in the very culture of this hotel, and if left unchecked, it would continue to poison every interaction, every guest's experience. He needed to see more, to understand the full extent of what had gone wrong beneath the polished surface. Inside his room, Samuel set down his worn bag and took a slow, deliberate survey of the space. The room was clean at first glance, but cracks in the facade quickly became apparent. Faint stains mottled the carpet near the bed, and the bathroom mirror bore smudges that housekeeping had clearly missed. These weren't glaring flaws, but they spoke volumes. They whispered of corners cut, standards lowered, pride lost, the impeccable attention to detail Samuel had once demanded. The hallmark of his brand was slipping away like sand through his fingers. A heavy weight settled in his chest. This was no accident. This was neglect, carelessness, and a silent resignation to decline. Determined to dig deeper, he stepped out into the dim hallway, blending seamlessly with the staff and guests alike. His goal was clear: observe how the employees treated each other when the eyes of guests weren't on them, when no one was watching. Passing a housekeeping cart parked outside a room, Samuel caught sight of a young woman kneeling on the carpet, furiously scrubbing a stubborn stain. Her uniform was wrinkled, her face glistening with sweat, and her movements betrayed frustration. "You okay?" he asked gently, stopping beside her. She looked up sharply, startled by the sudden presence, then quickly composed herself. "Oh yeah, just trying to get this stain out," she said, her voice quiet but edged with weariness. "Been here long?" Samuel crouched to inspect the spot. The woman let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow and void of humor. "They don't care. As long as it looks decent enough, it stays." He studied her face. There was a story behind those tired eyes, a tale of resilience shadowed by disappointment. "What's your name?" "Maria," she replied, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "And how long have you been here?" 2 years. Long enough to know how things really work. Samuel leaned back against the wall, his curiosity sharpened. "And how do things really work, Maria?" She hesitated, casting a furtive glance down the hall before lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. They push us to clean rooms fast, but they don't give us enough time. If we complain, they say we're making excuses. If a guest notices something we missed, we get written up. Samuel frowned, the name they hanging heavily in the air. Who's they? The managers, mostly Mr. Carter. Samuel filed the name away carefully. And Jessica? He pressed gently. Maria sighed, a heavy exhale that seemed to carry the weight of the entire hotel. She's the worst. Acts like she owns the place. If she doesn't like how someone looks, she treats them like garbage. Some guests have even complained, but nothing happens. Confirmation. It wasn't just Jessica's rudeness. This was a failure of leadership, a systemic breakdown that allowed disrespect and neglect to flourish unchecked. Before he could press further, a sharp voice sliced through the corridor. Maria, stop slacking and finish your rooms. Samuel turned to see a man in his late 40s standing at the far end of the hall. He was thick-set, impeccably dressed in a pressed suit, and holding a clipboard. His gaze was hard, impatient. Maria's posture stiffened instantly. Yes, Mr. Carter, she said quickly, gathering her cleaning supplies and heading down the hall. Samuel's eyes followed her retreating figure, then shifted to the manager. Carter gave him a quick, dismissive glance. You a guest? Carter asked brusquely. Samuel nodded. Just checking in. Without another word, Carter turned away, barking orders at another employee farther down the corridor. Samuel exhaled slowly, a mixture of frustration and resolve tightening in his chest. He had seen enough to know the culture here was broken, and it started from the very top. That night, back in his room, Samuel pored over his notes. Jessica's callousness wasn't an isolated lapse. It was a symptom of a much larger problem. The leadership's neglect had created a toxic environment where disrespect and carelessness thrived. The entire system needed to be dismantled and rebuilt. Tomorrow he would dig deeper. This wasn't about punishing one bad employee. It was about saving an entire team, an entire company, from collapse. Samuel woke early, steeling himself to delve further into the hotel's workings. The incident at the front desk revealed how guests were treated, and Maria's words confirmed the staff were suffering under poor management. But surface-level glimpses weren't enough. He needed the full picture before revealing himself. Dressed again in the same worn casual clothes, Samuel made his way to the hotel's dining area. Breakfast service was included, offering a perfect chance to observe interactions between staff and guests in a more dynamic setting. As he entered, his eyes landed on an older couple standing near the food station, their expressions clouded with confusion. The man pointed toward empty trays where eggs and bacon should have been, while his wife scanned the room, searching desperately for an employee. Nearby, a worker in uniform cleaned the counter with slow, lethargic movements, completely disengaged from the guest's obvious dilemma. Samuel approached the couple with calm concern. Everything okay? The woman sighed, her voice tinged with disappointment. We were just wondering if they'll be bringing out more food. There's barely anything left. Turning to the staff member, Samuel asked politely, Do you know when they'll be restocking the food? The response was cold and dismissive, whenever the kitchen gets to it. Samuel noted the employee's slouched posture and vacant gaze. No urgency, no sense of responsibility, no service. Is there someone in charge? Samuel asked, probing. The worker shrugged carelessly. Managers are in the back. Samuel nodded politely to the couple, then headed toward the kitchen. Pushing through the swinging doors, he was immediately enveloped by the sounds of clattering pans and muffled conversations. Two cooks moved quickly, faces tense and focused. Across the room, a man in a suit stood with arms crossed, watching silently. Samuel recognized him instantly. Carter, the same manager who had scolded Maria. One of the cooks, a younger man with tired eyes, glanced up nervously. Sir, we're doing our best. We just ran out faster than expected. Carter shook his head sharply. That's not my problem. You should have planned better. Samuel stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Sounds like they could use some extra hands. Carter turned sharply, eyes narrowing. Who are you? Just a guest, Samuel replied casually. One who noticed breakfast running out faster than it should. The tension in the kitchen was palpable. Carter's expression flickered with irritation as Samuel approached. We're handling it, Carter said curtly, arms crossed as he leaned against the counter. Samuel's gaze shifted to the two cooks hustling behind the scenes, faces drawn, muscles tight, moving tirelessly to keep up with the rush. Carter, meanwhile, remained detached, offering no assistance, no encouragement. I'm sure you are, Samuel replied evenly, his voice calm but firm. But maybe, handling it means stepping in when your team needs help. Carter scoffed, dismissing the suggestion outright. That's not how this works. They have a job to do. If they can't keep up, that's on them. Samuel held Carter's gaze a moment longer, a slow nod of understanding settling over him. This wasn't about laziness or incompetence. It was something far more insidious, a complete lack of leadership. Carter didn't want to solve problems. He wanted to deflect blame and maintain the status quo. Turning on his heel, Samuel left the kitchen without another word, but his mind was racing. What he'd seen today wasn't an isolated failure. The rude receptionist, the overworked staff, the uncaring management. It was all part of a systemic breakdown. The culture here was toxic, and it started from the very top. Back in the lobby, Samuel watched guests check out, their faces a mixture of relief and frustration. Jessica was at the front desk again, her demeanor unchanged, cold, detached, dismissive. A man in a business suit approached, politely asking about a late checkout. Jessica barely looked up, replying with a curt and impatient tone. Moments later, a woman with a stroller inquired about cribs for her infant. Jessica sighed audibly, clearly annoyed. The woman's discomfort was palpable as she shifted from foot to foot, eyes downcast. Samuel had seen enough. He stepped forward, placing his room key on the counter. Jessica barely glanced his way. Checking out, he said flatly. I'd like to speak with the general manager, he added. Jessica finally looked up, her expression shifting subtly, something between surprise and suspicion. Why? She asked. Because I have some concerns, Samuel replied simply. Jessica hesitated, then reached for the phone. After a brief conversation, she hung up. Mr. Carter will meet you in the office. Samuel nodded and walked toward the hallway leading to the administrative offices. Inside, Carter sat behind his desk, arms folded, looking mildly annoyed. You needed something? Carter asked, his voice sharp. Samuel shut the door behind him and took a seat, his expression calm but resolute. Yes, I think it's time I introduced myself properly. Carter leaned back, eyes narrowing. Samuel continued, My name is Samuel Whitmore. I own this hotel. The color drained from Carter's face. His posture stiffened as uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Samuel let the silence linger, watching the realization settle in. Then, his tone grew colder, more authoritative. I've spent the last day observing how this hotel operates. I've seen guests ignored, employees mistreated, and a complete absence of leadership from management. Carter opened his mouth to speak, but Samuel cut him off. Jessica, your front desk employee openly mocked a family in the lobby. I saw it with my own eyes. She treated them like they didn't belong simply because of how they looked. And you let that happen. Carter's mouth pressed into a thin line. I wasn't aware of that situation. Samuel's gaze sharpened. Then that's another failure. If you don't know what's happening on your own floor, what exactly are you managing? Carter's fingers tapped nervously against the desk, a telltale sign of his discomfort. Look, no excuses, Samuel interrupted firmly. "I also saw how you handled the kitchen staff this morning. Instead of supporting them, you stood back and criticized. You allowed problems to fester instead of solving them." Carter swallowed hard. I'm done here," Samuel declared, standing. Carter's face went pale. "Wait." Samuel didn't wait. He turned and walked out of the office, his decision final. Outside, Jessica remained at the front desk. She looked up as Samuel approached, her expression wary. His voice rang clear through the lobby. "You are also no longer employed here." Jessica's eyes widened in shock. "What? You heard me." "This is not how my business treats people," Samuel said firmly. Jessica sputtered, glancing around as if expecting support that never came. Samuel turned to the gathered staff. Some had paused, watching the unfolding scene, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "This hotel is changing," he said, "and it starts today." For a long moment, silence hung in the air. Then, slowly, some of the employees nodded. Small signs of cautious hope. Samuel exhaled deeply. There was still so much work ahead, but this was the first step. The tension lingered in the lobby long after Jessica stormed out. Employees exchanged uneasy glances, some shifting uncomfortably, others daring to hope. Samuel scanned the room. Removing the two most glaring problems was necessary, but far from sufficient. A culture like this didn't form overnight, and it wouldn't be healed with one sweeping decision. His eyes settled on the young bellboy Jessica had whispered to the day before. The boy looked nervous, avoiding eye contact. Samuel approached gently. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy answered quickly. "You've been here long?" "Almost a year." Samuel studied Ethan, the slight hesitation in his posture, the furtive glances toward the exit. He recognized the signs: uncertainty, fear, and a desperate need for belonging. "I noticed you with Jessica yesterday," Samuel said softly. "You laughed at what she said about that family." Ethan's face paled. He straightened, shaking his head quickly. "I'm not here to fire you," Samuel reassured him. "I want to understand why you went along with it." Ethan swallowed hard, then exhaled slowly. "She's been here longer than me. Everyone knows she can make your life miserable if she wants. He hesitated, voice dropping to a whisper. "I didn't want to be her next target." Samuel nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place exactly as he had feared. Jessica's cruelty hadn't just been an isolated act of rudeness toward guests. It had poisoned the entire work environment. Employees who should have stood up to her instead stayed silent, trapped by fear and uncertainty. The toxic influence of one person had metastasized into a culture of silence and complicity. "Did you ever report her?" Samuel asked gently. Ethan let out a short, tired laugh, a sound weighed down by years of resignation. "To who?" "Carter," Ethan answered, shaking his head. "He didn't care. If anything, he played favorites. If you complained, you got fewer shifts. You learned to keep your mouth shut." Samuel's jaw tightened. The more he uncovered, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just a few individuals behaving badly. This was leadership failure at its worst, allowing a culture of neglect, fear, and disrespect to fester unchecked. Turning to the gathered staff, Samuel's voice grew firm, demanding honesty. "I need all of you to be honest with me. The problems here don't start and end with two people. I want to know what's really been happening." For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Maria stepped forward, her voice steady but weary. "Housekeeping is always understaffed. They push us to clean rooms faster than is reasonable, but they never listen when we say it's too much. If we don't finish on time, we get blamed." A man in a maintenance uniform added, "Supplies take forever to get approved. We're told to make do instead of actually fixing things properly." From the restaurant area, a woman hesitated before speaking up. "We're not given enough food during breakfast shifts. Every morning it's a scramble, and guests get upset." Samuel absorbed every word, the weight of their struggles settling deep within him. He had always believed in running his business with integrity, but now he saw how easily that vision had been twisted when left unattended. He scanned the room, locking eyes with each employee in turn. Starting today, things change. Skepticism flickered across several faces. Promises had been made before and broken. Samuel acknowledged their doubt. "We're bringing in a new manager, someone who actually listens and leads." Maria folded her arms, her skepticism still evident. "And if they're just like Carter, they won't be." Samuel's voice hardened with resolve. "I'll be making that decision myself." He turned to Denise, the restaurant worker. "Tomorrow you'll get the supplies you need. No more running out of food mid-service." She nodded, though hesitation lingered in her eyes. "The maintenance," he continued, looking at the man in uniform. "You'll get a full budget review. If something needs fixing, it will get fixed." Finally, he faced Maria again. "Housekeeping won't be pushed past their limits anymore. If we need more staff, we'll hire more staff." The employees exchanged glances. They wanted to believe him, but trust wasn't something rebuilt overnight. Samuel ran a hand through his beard, exhaling slowly. "I know words don't mean much if nothing changes, so here's what I'm going to do. I'll be staying here for the next 2 weeks, not as a CEO, but as part of the team." That statement shifted the atmosphere. Heads lifted, eyes widened. He could see the surprise, the flicker of cautious hope. "You'll see for yourselves how serious I am," he said. "I want to know what works, what doesn't, and what needs fixing. And when I leave, I'll make sure those changes actually happen." A few employees nodded. Others remained uncertain. But something had undeniably shifted. Samuel turned to Ethan. "You're young. You have a choice now. Do you want to be someone who follows the worst examples or someone better?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I want to be better." "Good," Samuel said with a small, encouraging smile. "Then prove it." The bellboy straightened, determination settling into his features. Samuel stepped back, surveying the room one last time. This wasn't going to be easy. He had let too much slip through the cracks, and now he had to rebuild, not just policies, but trust. But he would. Because no one would ever again walk into one of his hotels feeling like they didn't belong. Later, Samuel returned to his temporary office, a modest room tucked behind the administrative hallway. The desk was cluttered with reports, guest feedback, employee schedules, and maintenance logs. For the past 2 days, he had immersed himself deeply in the hotel's day-to-day operations, working alongside staff, observing interactions, and listening intently. What had seemed like surface-level problems were actually symptoms of deeper structural issues that had allowed decay to persist. The most pressing concern now was hiring a new general manager. Carter's departure had left a leadership vacuum. While some employees were relieved, others felt uneasy, uncertain about what the future held. Samuel knew that bringing in the right person was the key to sustaining the changes he wanted to make. It wasn't just about experience, it was about finding someone who understood the culture he needed to rebuild. He had already consulted corporate about potential candidates, but wanted to hear from the people on the ground, the employees who had endured the worst of poor leadership. They deserved a voice in who would lead them next. That afternoon, Samuel gathered a small group of senior employees in a conference room. Maria was there, along with the head of maintenance, the lead restaurant worker, and a senior housekeeping member. Ethan sat too, looking slightly out of place among the seasoned staff, but Samuel noticed a shift in him. He carried himself differently now, more aware of his role in shaping the hotel's culture. Leaning forward, hands resting on the table, Samuel addressed the group plainly. We need a new general manager. I have a few candidates in mind, but before I decide, I want to hear from all of you. Maria spoke first. We need someone who actually listens, not just someone who nods and ignores us later. Lewis, the maintenance head, added, and someone who understands the job, not just the numbers. Carter only cared about what looked good on paper. He never saw what it really took to keep this place running. Denise crossed her arms. We need someone who respects the staff, not just the people in suits. Samuel nodded firmly. I agree. That's exactly what I'm looking for. He glanced at Ethan. What about you? Ethan hesitated before speaking. I think we need someone who makes people want to do their best, not because they're scared, but because they actually care about this place. Samuel studied him briefly, then turned back to the group. There's a candidate I'm considering. Her name is Rebecca Hayes. She's managed one of our smaller hotels for the past 5 years. She has a strong track record, a good reputation, but more importantly, I've spoken with employees who worked under her. They all say the same thing. She runs a tight ship, but she's fair. She's the kind of leader people trust. Maria narrowed her eyes slightly. And she won't just come in here to keep things the same? Samuel shook his head. I want change, and I need someone who can make sure it lasts. Rebecca isn't afraid to make tough calls, but she also knows how to build a team. I think she's exactly what this hotel needs. Lewis exhaled deeply. If she's really like that, then she's a step up from Carter. Denise nodded. Worth a shot. Maria remained skeptical but said nothing more. Ethan simply listened, absorbing every word. Samuel concluded, I'll have her here by the end of the week. In the meantime, I'm making some immediate changes. He pulled out a notepad and began listing off adjustments. Housekeeping would receive additional staff to ease their workload. The restaurant would get a structured inventory system to prevent food shortages. Maintenance would receive a clear, dedicated budget for necessary repairs. These aren't temporary fixes, he emphasized. They're structural changes designed to set a new standard. As the meeting wrapped up, Maria lingered behind while the others left. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. You're really staying here the whole 2 weeks? Samuel nodded. I said I would. She considered him for a moment, then nodded back. Good, because people are watching. They're waiting to see if this is real. Samuel met her gaze steadily. It is. She studied him for a beat longer, then finally left the room. That evening, Samuel walked the hotel halls, observing. The atmosphere already felt different. Employees moved with more confidence, their steps lighter. The tension that had lingered after Carter and Jessica's departure was still present, but it was beginning to fade. At the front desk, Ethan assisted a guest. His tone was professional, his posture upright. When he noticed Samuel, he gave a small nod, not one of fear, but of acknowledgement. Samuel nodded back. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt the hotel was finally on the right path.